Yuna pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the observation booth, hoping no one would notice her. She had been working on Station Vermilion for 3 months now, and she still hated every moment she had to spend in the training arena. The noise was overwhelming. Warriors from a dozen different alien species shouted commands at their dragons, trying to prove they were the strongest, the loudest, the most deserving of a bond. Yuna was a xenobiologist, not a warrior. She had signed up to study alien life forms, to take notes and compile data. She never wanted to be down on that training floor with those massive creatures. The Starvale dragons were beautiful, yes, but they were also terrifying. Each one was the size of a small spacecraft, with scales like armor plating and teeth that could bite through steel. They breathed fire hot enough to melt rock, and they were telepathic, which meant they could sense fear. Yuna had plenty of fear to sense. She pulled out her data tablet and started taking notes, trying to focus on the scientific details instead of the chaos below. The dragons moved with surprising grace for creatures so large. Their wings created wind currents that she could feel even up in the observation booth. She noted the way they tilted their heads when listening to commands, the way their scales changed color slightly depending on their mood. Support staff to the floor. Yuna's head snapped up. That was Vrokthar's voice booming through the arena speakers. Vrokthar was a Thexian, one of the reptilian species that made up most of the Concordance military. He was also the head dragon handler, and he seemed to enjoy making Yuna's life difficult. All support staff report to the training floor immediately, Vrokthar repeated. Today's hatchlings need proper enrichment targets. Yuna felt her stomach drop. Enrichment targets. That was a polite way of saying the baby dragons needed something to chase. She looked around the observation booth desperately. There were 5 other support staff members there, all of them already heading toward the exit. She couldn't hide. If she didn't go, Vrokthar would file a complaint and she might lose her position on the station. She took a deep breath and followed the others down to the arena floor. The training arena was even more intimidating from ground level. The ceiling stretched high above, reinforced with energy shields to contain dragon fire. The floor was made of heat-resistant composite that still showed scorch marks from previous training sessions. Around the edges of the arena, warriors stood in full combat gear, watching and waiting for their chance to impress the hatchlings. Yuna tried to stay near the exit, but Vrokthar spotted her immediately. "Xenobiologist Han," he called out, his voice dripping with contempt. "Front and center. Let's see if you can run faster than you take notes." Several warriors laughed. Yuna felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she walked toward the center of the arena. The other support staff spread out around her. They all looked nervous, but they had done this before. Yuna had always managed to avoid hatchling exposure days until now. "The exercise is simple," Vrokthar announced to the assembled crowd. "When the hatchlings are released, you run. They chase. This stimulates their hunting instincts and allows them to demonstrate their speed and coordination. The warriors will observe which hatchlings show the most promise." Yuna's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, trying to stay calm. Running would just make things worse. She knew that from her research. Prey runs, predators chase. But if she didn't run, Vrokthar would single her out again. "Release the hatchlings," Vrokthar ordered. 12 doors opened along the far wall of the arena. 12 baby dragons emerged, each one about the size of a shuttle vehicle. They were smaller than the adult dragons, but still large enough to be dangerous. Their scales gleamed in the arena lights, different colors marking different genetic lines: gold, silver, bronze, red, blue. The other support staff bolted immediately, screaming as they had been instructed. The hatchlings' heads all turned toward the movement, tracking the running figures with predatory focus. Yuna couldn't move. Her legs simply wouldn't obey. She stood frozen in the center of the arena, watching the hatchlings spread their wings and prepare to chase. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. But then something strange happened. The hatchlings ignored the running targets. Instead, all 12 of them turned and looked directly at Yuna. She felt a pressure in her mind, like someone gently knocking on a door. It wasn't painful, just unexpected. Foreign. The hatchlings moved toward her as one group, their movements synchronized in a way that seemed impossible for creatures that had never trained together. Yuna's instinct told her to run, but her body still wouldn't move. So instead, she did the only thing she could think of. She sat down on the arena floor, made herself as small as possible, and closed her eyes. The hatchlings surrounded her. Yuna heard gasps from the watching warriors. She heard Vrokthar shouting something, but she couldn't make out the words over the sound of her own heartbeat. She felt wind from massive wings, smelled the sulfur scent of dragon breath, felt the heat of 12 bodies forming a circle around her position, but she didn't feel teeth or claws.
She didn't feel pain.
Slowly, carefully, Yuna opened her eyes. The hatchlings had formed a wall around her. Their wings were spread wide, creating a barrier between Yuna and the rest of the arena. They faced outward, and the sound coming from their throats was not a roar but a low, rumbling growl, a warning to anyone who might approach. The largest hatchling, a beautiful creature with golden scales that faded to purple at the edges, had curled her body directly around Yuna. The dragon's head was easily twice the size of Yuna's entire body, but she lowered it gently until her massive eye was level with Yuna's face. Yuna stared into that eye and felt the knocking sensation in her mind again. This time she didn't resist. She didn't know how to resist. The presence flooded in, and suddenly Yuna felt emotions that weren't her own. Loneliness, confusion, fear, and underneath it all, a desperate need to protect something precious. The dragon made a sound Yuna had never heard before. It was almost like a purr, deep and vibrating. The sound seemed to resonate in Yuna's chest, calming her racing heart. What is the meaning of this? Vroktar's voice cut through the moment. He was stalking across the arena floor, fury evident in every movement. The hatchlings' growls grew louder. Their wings spread wider. The golden dragon's purr stopped, replaced by a warning hiss. Vroktar stopped walking. Even he, experienced handler that he was, recognized the danger of approaching dragons in a protective stance. "This is unprecedented," a new voice said. Yuna looked up to see a Korthane warrior entering the arena. She recognized him from station briefings. Commander Thex, the station's military leader. His scarred face showed no emotion as he studied the scene before him. "Commander, these hatchlings are clearly defective," Vrokthar said quickly. "They should be destroyed and replaced with a proper clutch." "Defective?" Commander Thex moved closer, though he was careful to stay outside the hatchlings' protective circle. "They recognized a potential bond and acted to secure it. That demonstrates intelligence and initiative." "She is not a warrior," Vrokthar protested. "She is a support technician, a scientist. She has no business bonding with war dragons." Commander Thex looked at Yuna, who was still sitting on the floor with a dragon curled around her like a living fortress. "The dragon seemed to disagree with your assessment." Yuna found her voice, though it came out smaller than she wanted. "I don't understand what's happening." "You've been chosen," Commander Thex said simply. "The question is whether you'll accept." The next 6 hours felt like a strange dream to Yuna. The training arena had been evacuated except for essential personnel. The hatchlings refused to move away from her, and after 3 failed attempts to separate them, Commander Thex ordered everyone to stop trying. Now Yuna sat in the center of the arena with 12 baby dragons forming a protective barrier around her, while various experts argued about what to do. "This has never happened before," Dr. Park Minji said for the 5th time. She was pacing back and forth outside the circle of hatchlings, her data tablet clutched in her hands. Minji was the station's head xenopsychologist and one of only 3 other humans on Station Vermilion. Yuna had met her briefly during orientation, but they had never really talked. "Dragons bond with warriors," Vrokthar insisted. He stood with his arms crossed, glaring at the scene. "Strong warriors. Dominant personalities. Not frightened technicians who hide in corners. And yet here we are," Commander Thex observed dryly. Dr. Park explained the bonding process again, simply. Minji stopped pacing and turned to face the commander. "Starvale dragons are telepathic. They don't just sense thoughts, they sense the fundamental nature of a person, what we call soul resonance. When a dragon finds someone whose inner nature matches their own, they bond. It's instinctive and permanent. These are war dragons," Vrokthar said, bred specifically for aggression and combat dominance. How could they possibly resonate with her? He pointed at Yuna dismissively. Yuna felt a flash of anger at his tone, but before she could say anything, the golden dragon raised her head and hissed at Vrokthar. The sound echoed through the arena and the other hatchlings joined in, creating a chorus of warning. Vrokthar actually took a step back. "Perhaps," Commander Thex said quietly, "we should let the humans speak." "Yuna, can you tell us what you're experiencing?" All eyes turned to Yuna. She swallowed hard, trying to organize her thoughts. "I can feel her, the golden one, in my head. Not words exactly, but emotions, feelings. She placed a hand on the dragon's scales. They were warm and smooth like polished stone heated by the sun. What is she feeling? Minji asked, moving closer with her tablet ready to record. Yuna closed her eyes and focused on the presence in her mind. It was easier now than it had been at first. She's scared. They're all scared. They've been scared for a long time. Scared? Frokthar laughed. Dragons are not scared. They are apex predators. The golden dragon's head swung toward Vrokthar, and this time the hiss was accompanied by a small gout of flame, not enough to injure, but enough to make a point. Vrokthar stumbled backward, nearly falling. I think, Commander Thek said mildly, the dragon disagrees with you again. Yuna opened her eyes and looked up at the golden dragon's face. Can you show me? She whispered. Can you help me understand? The pressure in her mind increased, and suddenly Yuna was flooded with images. She saw the hatching chamber, dozens of eggs cracking open. She saw larger, more aggressive hatchlings pushing the smaller ones away from the food. She felt the confusion of wanting to fight back but being too scared. She felt the loneliness of being overlooked, of watching other dragons bond with strong warriors while being left behind. Tears ran down Yuna's face. They're not defective, she said, her voice shaking. They're just different. The other hatchlings in their clutch were bigger and more aggressive. These 12 got pushed aside during feeding. They learned to hide, to stay quiet, to protect each other instead of competing. Minji was typing rapidly on her tablet. That would explain the synchronized behavior. They've been functioning as a group for survival. It still doesn't make them suitable for combat. Vrokthar muttered. Perhaps not traditional combat, Commander Thek said, but that is not the immediate concern. The Concordance Council is convening an emergency session to decide what happens next. In the meantime, Han Yuna, you will be moved to temporary handler quarters with the hatchlings. Since they won't leave you, there's no practical alternative. Yuna's eyes widened. I don't know how to be a dragon handler. Then you will learn, Commander Thek said. Li Jihun will be assigned as your mentor. You have 7 days to demonstrate that you can function in this role. If you cannot, the hatchlings will be reconditioned. He said the last word carefully, but Yuna understood what it meant. You'd kill them? We would assign them to other handlers, Commander Thek corrected. By force if necessary. The process is traumatic and often unsuccessful, but it has been done before. The golden dragon's body tensed around Yuna, and she felt a spike of fear through their connection. No, Yuna said firmly. I'll do it. I'll learn. Just don't hurt them, Commander Thek nodded. 7 days, Han Yuna. Make them count. The handler quarters were much nicer than Yuna's previous room. The main space was large enough to accommodate all 12 hatchlings comfortably, with reinforced walls and a high ceiling. There was a smaller private room for Yuna with an actual bed and a desk. The hatchlings explored their new space curiously while Yuna stood in the center, still trying to process everything that had happened. You look terrified. Yuna spun around to find a man standing in the doorway. He was Korean like her, probably in his 40s with short gray hair and numerous scars on his hands and arms. He carried himself like a soldier, straight-backed and alert. Li Jihun? Yuna asked. That's right. Your new mentor. He walked into the room, studying the hatchlings with an experienced eye. I heard what happened in the arena. Never seen anything like it in 5 years of handling dragons. You have a dragon? Yuna asked. Teko. Big red male, mean as hell, loyal to a fault. Jihun smiled slightly. He's the only other Starvale dragon bonded to a human. I was military before I came here. Special forces. Took 3 years before Teko accepted me. And you're supposed to teach me everything you know in 7 days? Jihun laughed. No, I'm supposed to teach you enough to survive 7 days. Everything else comes later if you make it that far. He walked over to the golden hatchling and held out his hand. The dragon sniffed it cautiously, then allowed him to touch her snout. She's beautiful. Have you named her? I was thinking Bora, Yuna said quietly. It means purple in Korean. Look at the edges of her scales. Jihun examined the purple tint along the dragon's wing membranes. Good eye. Bora it is. He turned to face Yuna. Let's establish some basics. First, dragons need to eat twice a day. The station provides specialized feed, high in protein and minerals. Second, they need exercise. These hatchlings should be flying at least 4 hours daily. Third, they need mental stimulation. Bored dragons are destructive dragons. Yuna pulled out her data tablet and started taking notes. This she could handle. Information, procedures, data. Fourth, Jihoon continued. And most important, you need to establish your role in the bond. Dragons respect strength, but strength comes in many forms. Physical power is just one type. You need to figure out what kind of strength you have and how to project it. I'm not strong, Yuna said quietly. That's the problem. Jihoon raised an eyebrow. You sat in front of 12 dragons without running. You demanded they show you their feelings. You negotiated with Commander Thex to protect them. Seems pretty strong to me. That's different, is it? Jihoon walked to the door. Training starts tomorrow at 600 hours. Get some rest, and Yuna, those dragons chose you for a reason. Try to figure out what that reason is. After Jihoon left, Yuna sat down on the floor. The hatchlings immediately gathered around her, a familiar protective formation. Bora curled up beside her, and Yuna leaned against the dragon's warm body. Why did you choose me? Yuna asked softly. She felt Bora's presence in her mind again, gentler this time. Images and emotions flowed through their connection. Yuna saw herself from Bora's perspective, sitting small and quiet in the corner of the observation booth. She felt the dragon's recognition of that behavior, the understanding of what it meant to hide, to be overlooked, to find safety in silence. You chose me because I'm like you, Yuna whispered. Not in spite of it. Bora made that deep purring sound again, and Yuna felt a wave of contentment wash through their bond. The other hatchlings settled down around them, forming a living wall of scales and wings. For the first time since arriving on Station Vermilion, Yuna felt like she belonged somewhere. The first 3 days of training were the hardest thing Yuna had ever done. Jihoon woke her before dawn each morning and put her through exercises that left her exhausted and sore. She learned how to properly feed 12 hungry dragons without losing a hand. She learned the commands that handlers use to direct their dragons in flight. She learned to recognize the subtle color changes that indicated a dragon's mood. But most importantly, she learned that she was doing everything wrong. You're treating them like research subjects, Jihoon said on the third day. They were in one of the outdoor training yards, watching the hatchlings practice flying in formation. You observe them, take notes, analyze their behavior, but you don't command them. They follow my instructions, Yuna protested. They follow your suggestions, Jihoon corrected. There's a difference. When I tell Teko to dive, he dives. When you ask those hatchlings to turn left, they discuss it among themselves first. Yuna watched Bora leading the other hatchlings through a banking turn. They moved together beautifully, each one adjusting their position to match the others. Is that such a bad thing? In combat? Yes, Jihoon crossed his arms. Split-second decisions mean life or death. You need absolute control. But I don't want absolute control, Yuna said quietly. That's not what they need from me. Jihoon opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He studied Yuna carefully. What do you think they need? Yuna thought about the emotions she felt through her bond with Bora. The need to protect, to be protected, to work together. They need to know they're not alone anymore, that someone understands them. That won't keep them alive in a fight. Maybe not, Yuna admitted, but it's all I have to offer. That afternoon, everything changed. Yuna was running through basic flight drills with the hatchlings when alarms started blaring across the training yard. She looked up to see Vrokthar striding toward her, a cruel smile on his reptilian face. Emergency combat evaluation, he announced loudly. All handlers must demonstrate their dragons can respond to real threats. Yuna's stomach dropped. What kind of threat? Vrokthar gestured to the far end of the training yard. A massive gate was opening, and through it walked the largest dragon Yuna had ever seen. It was easily 5 times the size of the hatchlings, covered in battle scars with scales so dark they were almost black. That's Scar, Jihoon said, appearing at Yuna's side. His face was grim. One of the station's combat veterans. Vrokthar, this is madness. Those hatchlings aren't ready. Then she should have trained them better, Vrokthar said. The evaluation is mandatory. Her dragons must demonstrate they can defend their handler against a real threat. Scar advanced across the training yard, moving with the confidence of a predator that had never lost a fight. The hatchlings immediately flew to Yuna's position, landing in a protective circle around her. They were growling, wings spread, trying to make themselves look bigger. But Yuna could feel their fear through the bond. They knew they were outmatched. What do I do? Yuna asked Jihoon desperately. You fight, Jihoon said. Order them to attack, use coordinated strikes, aim for the eyes and joints. Yuna looked at her hatchlings. Bora was trembling, but she held her ground. The others looked to her for guidance, their mental voices crying out in Yuna's mind. They would fight if she asked them to. They would die trying to protect her. Scar roared, a sound that shook the ground beneath Yuna's feet. He lunged forward and the hatchlings launched themselves at him in a disorganized swarm. Scar swatted the first two aside with his massive tail. A third he caught in his jaws, shaking the hatchling like a toy before throwing it across the yard. Yuna heard herself screaming. The injured hatchlings weren't seriously hurt, but they were stunned, frightened. The others pressed their attack, breathing fire and slashing with their claws, but they might as well have been attacking a mountain. "Stop," Yuna shouted. "Everyone stop." The hatchlings hesitated, confused. Scar used the opportunity to advance another 10 feet, his jaws open wide. 3 days before the gala, everything fell apart. Yuna was helping Yunha with her dragon bonding exercises when the emergency alarms started blaring. Not the training yard alarms, but the station-wide emergency klaxons that Yuna had only heard during drills. The sound was deafening, echoing off the metal walls. "All personnel to stations," Commander Thex's voice boomed over the speakers. "This is not a drill. Hostile forces detected. Prepare for possible combat." Jihoon appeared in the training yard entrance, his face serious. "Yuna, get the hatchlings to the secure hangar, now." "What's happening?" Yuna asked, but she was already calling the hatchlings to her side. "Vrelin swarm," Jihoon said grimly. "Scout ships detected 3 systems away. The Council is debating whether to evacuate or defend, but we need to prepare for the worst either way." The Vrelin. Yuna had read about them in her xenobiology studies. Insectoid raiders who attacked in massive numbers, overwhelming their targets through sheer volume. They were one of the few species the Concordance genuinely feared. The next few hours were chaos. Dragon handlers rushed to prepare their bonded pairs for potential combat. Station personnel packed essential equipment and data. Civilians and non-combat staff were directed to evacuation shuttles. Yuna took the hatchlings to the secondary hangar as instructed, but her mind was racing. "You're being evacuated," Jihoon told her when he found her in the hangar. "You and the hatchlings. The transport leaves in 2 hours. What about you?" Yuna asked. "Teiko and I are staying. We're part of the primary defense wing." He saw the expression on her face and softened slightly. "The hatchlings aren't ready for combat, Yuna. You've done incredible work with them, but they're still babies. If the Vrelin attack, they need to be far away from here." Yuna looked at her 12 hatchlings. They were huddled together, picking up on her anxiety through the bond. Bora pressed against her side, seeking comfort. "I understand," Yuna said quietly. But she didn't. Not really. Everything in her screamed that this was wrong, that separating from the hatchlings now would undo all the trust they had built. Through the bond, she felt Bora's distress growing. The dragon didn't understand why there was talk of separation. 2 hours later, Yuna stood in front of the evacuation shuttle with her pack slung over her shoulder. Kim Sora, a human maintenance worker who had become her friend over the past week, stood beside her. "You look like you're about to do something stupid," Sora observed. "I can't leave them," Yuna said. "They don't understand. They think I'm abandoning them. You're not. You're keeping them safe, am I?" Yuna turned to face her friend. "Or am I just proving what everyone already thinks? That I'm not strong enough to be their handler?" Sora was quiet for a moment. Then she reached up and pulled the evacuation badge off Yuna's jacket. "You've been teaching those dragons that they're stronger together. Are you going to prove that wrong now?" Yuna stared at the badge in Sora's hand. Then she made a decision that would either save everything or destroy it. She turned and ran back toward the hangar. When she arrived, she found Vrokthar's team preparing to sedate the hatchlings for transport. The dragons were agitated, fighting against the handlers trying to inject them with tranquilizers. "Stop," Yuna commanded, her voice carrying across the hangar. Vrokthar turned, surprise evident on his face. "You should be on the evacuation shuttle." "I'm not leaving," Yuna said. "And neither are they." "That's not your decision to make." "Actually, it is." Yuna walked up to him, surprised by her own courage. "Handler's privilege. My dragons stay with me." "You're not an official handler," Vrokthar snarled. "Then file a complaint after the crisis is over," Yuna shot back. "But right now those dragons are under my care, and I'm countermanding your sedation order." Before Vrokthar could respond, Dr. Park Minji appeared. "She's right," Minji said calmly. "Forcibly separating bonded dragons from their handler during a crisis. could cause severe psychological damage. The xenopsychological risks are too high. Vrokthar looked between them, then threw up his hands in disgust. Fine. But when the Vrelen come, their blood is on your hands. He stormed out of the hangar. Una collapsed against Bora's side, shaking with adrenaline. What had she just done? The Vrelen fleet arrived 6 hours later. Una watched on the hangar view screens as hundreds of bioships dropped out of hyperspace. They looked like massive insects, all chitinous armor and sharp angles. The station's defenses activated immediately, energy shields glowing as plasma batteries began firing. Then the dragons launched. Una watched Jihoon's wing take flight. 12 bonded pairs of elite handlers and their massive war beasts. They flew in perfect formation, breathing fire at the incoming Vrelen ships. It was beautiful and terrifying. In the secondary hangar, Una's hatchlings were restless. They could sense the violence happening outside, could feel the fear and aggression flooding through the station. They wanted to join the fight, to protect, to help. Not yet, Una told them firmly. We stay here. We stay safe, but safety was an illusion. The view screen suddenly flared white as a Vrelen suicide ship broke through the shields and crashed into the station's eastern sector. Alarms blared again, different ones this time. Hull breach warnings. Fire suppression systems activating. Vrelen boarding parties in sections 7 through 12, the automated warning system announced. All personnel take defensive positions. The secondary hangar was in section 9. Una heard gunfire in the corridors outside. The hangar's guards took up positions at the entrance, weapons ready. Through the bond, Una felt the hatchlings' fear spike. They remembered the evaluation with Scar, remembered the feeling of being outmatched and helpless. This is different, Una told them, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. We're not alone this time. We have each other. The hangar doors exploded inward. Vrelen soldiers poured through the opening, dozens of them. They were smaller than Una had expected, about human-sized, but they moved with horrifying speed. The station guards opened fire, taking down the first wave, but more kept coming. A guard fell, then another. The Vrelen were using some kind of acid weapons that ate through armor. Una had seconds to make a choice. She could hide in the reinforced handler's office and hope the doors held. She could run for one of the emergency exits, or she could stand and fight. She walked to the center of the hangar floor. The hatchlings, sensing her resolve through the bond, surrounded her. This time they didn't form their protective wall out of fear. They formed it out of purpose. 3 layers, Una said calmly, projecting the formation through her bond with Bora. Outer layer intercepts projectiles. Middle layer returns fire. Inner layer guards the core. Move as one. Protect each other. The hatchlings shifted into position with a coordination that would have amazed their trainers. They had been practicing formations for a week, but this was the first time it mattered. The Vrelen charged. The outer layer of hatchlings spread their wings, creating a barrier that caught the acid projectiles. The membrane burned but held. The middle layer breathed fire in coordinated bursts. Not wild and aggressive like the war dragons, but precise and controlled. Each blast was timed to support the others, creating an overlapping field of flame. The inner layer, including Bora, watched for threats Una couldn't see and responded to her mental commands with instant precision. For 20 minutes, Una and 12 untrained hatchlings held the secondary hangar against a Vrelen assault force. They didn't fight with power or fury. They fought like a living shield, adapting to each attack, covering each other's weaknesses, moving as one organism. When station security finally arrived, the Vrelen were in full retreat. Una stood in the center of a scorched hangar, surrounded by exhausted hatchlings. Her clothes were torn, her face was covered in soot, and her hands were shaking. But she was alive. They were all alive. Commander Thex entered the hangar, his weapon still drawn. He looked at the scene before him, at the young human woman and her circle of dragons, at the Vrelen bodies scattered across the floor. He stared at Una for a long moment. Then he holstered his weapon and said quietly, "It seems I owe humanity an apology." Before Una could respond, the emergency alarms changed tone again. "All wings prepare for final assault," the automated system announced. "Vrelen main fleet approaching." Commander Thex looked at Una. "The battle isn't over. The Vrelen are preparing one last push at the station's core. We need every dragon we have." He paused. "Will you fight?" Una looked at her hatchlings. They were tired, some of them injured, but through the bond she felt their determination. They had found their purpose. They had proven they could protect what mattered. Yes, Yuna said. We'll fight. Commander Thex reorganized the dragon wings in the primary command center. Yuna stood among the elite handlers, feeling completely out of place in her torn clothes and soot-covered face. The other handlers wore proper armor and carried weapons. Yuna had a data tablet and 12 exhausted hatchlings. The Vrelen are regrouping for a final assault, Thex explained, pointing at the tactical display. They're targeting the station's reactor. If they destroy it, we all die. Jihoon's wing will handle offensive strikes against their fleet. Han Yuna, your dragons will defend the reactor core. Several handlers exchanged glances. Frokthar looked like he wanted to protest but kept silent. The reactor corridor is a defensive position, Thex continued. Traditional dragon tactics won't work there. We need something different. He looked at Yuna. Can your hatchlings hold that position? Yuna thought about the hangar defense, about the way her dragons moved together, protected each other, adapted to threats. Yes, she said. We can hold it. 30 minutes later, Yuna and the hatchlings were in position at the reactor entrance. The corridor was wide enough for the hatchlings to form their 3-layer defensive sphere. Behind them, the massive reactor hummed with power, its energy fields contained by shields that couldn't withstand a direct assault. Through the viewports, Yuna watched Jihoon's wing launch into space. The war dragons were magnificent, diving and spinning through the Vrelen fleet like dancers. But there were so many enemy ships. For every one the dragons destroyed, 2 more appeared. They're adapting, Yuna whispered to Bora. The Vrelen. They're learning to avoid the dragons' attack patterns. She felt Bora's acknowledgement through the bond. The dragon had noticed it too. The Vrelen fought through chaos and numbers. They were used to overwhelming individual defenders. But they had never faced defenders who thought as one. An idea formed in Yuna's mind. A crazy, impossible idea. She activated her communication link. Dr. Park, are you monitoring? Minji's voice came through immediately. I'm here, Yuna. What do you need? The telepathic bond between me and the hatchlings. How far does it extend? Hard to say. Why? Could it extend to other dragons? Could my hatchlings create a network? There was silence on the other end. Then Minji said carefully, theoretically, yes. Dragons are all telepathic, but they're also territorial and competitive. They've never been able to link like that. The aggression interferes. But my dragons aren't aggressive, Yuna said. They're cooperative. What if they could share their coordination with the other wings? That's never been attempted, Minji said. The psychological strain could be enormous. Yuna looked at her hatchlings. They were ready to die protecting this reactor, ready to hold this position no matter what came. But what if they could do more? Bora, Yuna said softly. Can you feel Teiko? Jihoon's dragon? Through the bond, she felt Bora reach out with her telepathic sense. The hatchling was young and her range was limited, but she could sense the massive red dragon fighting in space above them. Can you connect with him? Share what we do? Show him how we move together? Bora's uncertainty flowed through the bond. This was new, unfamiliar. But Yuna felt the hatchling's trust. If Yuna believed they could do this, Bora would try. Yuna opened the communication link to Commander Thex. I need to speak to Jihoon. Right now. A moment later, Jihoon's voice came through, strained from combat. Yuna, this isn't a good time. I know. But I think I can help. Tell Teiko to accept a telepathic link. From Bora. What? Yuna, that's not possible. Please, Yuna said. Just try. Trust me. She heard Jihoon curse in Korean. Then, reluctantly, Teiko, stand down your mental barriers. Let the hatchling in. Yuna felt the moment it happened. Bora's presence in her mind suddenly expanded, reaching out and touching something vast and powerful. Teiko's mind was like a fortress, all sharp edges and controlled fury. But he lowered his defenses and Bora slipped through. The hatchling showed Teiko what Yuna had taught them. How to move as one, how to know what your wingmates would do before they did it, how to cover each other's weaknesses and amplify each other's strengths. Through Bora, through Teiko, Yuna felt Jihoon's shock. What is this? Coordination, Yuna said. Real coordination. Let the other dragons join the network. It happened slowly at first. Teiko reached out to the dragon fighting beside him. That dragon reached to another. The aggressive war dragons resisted the unfamiliar connection, but they were also desperate. The battle was going badly. One by one, they opened themselves to the network. Yuna felt the moment all the dragons on the station linked together. It was overwhelming, dozens of minds touching hers through Bora. But the hatchlings helped her manage it, each one taking part of the burden. They became conduits, channels for information to flow between the fighting wings. In space, the dragon formations transformed. They stopped fighting as individual pairs and started fighting as a single organism. When one dragon dove, 3 others moved to cover the opening. When one needed to pull back, another was already in position to replace them. They eliminated overlap, predicted enemy movements, adapted faster than the Vrelin could counter. Through the viewports, Yuna watched the tide of battle turn. The Vrelin fleet, built on chaos and overwhelming numbers, couldn't adapt to an enemy that thought as one. Their attacks became disorganized, confused. The dragons pressed their advantage. Then the reactor alarms started blaring. Vrelin infiltration team in the reactor corridors, the automated system announced. Breach imminent. Yuna's hatchlings snapped back to full alert. Through the network, she felt Jihoon trying to pull dragons back to defend, but they were too far away, too engaged with the fleet. "We've got this," Yuna said calmly. "Focus on the fleet. We'll hold the reactor." The Vrelin came fast, a swarm of insectoid soldiers rushing down the corridor. More than the hangar, many more. But Yuna's hatchlings were ready. They had done this before. They knew their roles. The defensive sphere formed perfectly. 3 layers, each one supporting the others. The hatchlings moved with the confidence of a formation they had practiced 100 times. And through the network, every dragon on the station could see what they were doing, could feel the coordination, could learn. The Vrelin hit the sphere like a wave hitting a rock, and the rock didn't break. For 15 minutes, Yuna and her hatchlings held the reactor corridor, not through overwhelming force, but through perfect unity. Every attack was intercepted. Every gap was covered. The hatchlings fought with a discipline that veteran war dragons would have envied. Above them, the dragon wings destroyed the last of the Vrelin fleet. The battle was over. Yuna collapsed to her knees, the telepathic network finally releasing as the threat ended. The hatchlings gathered around her, exhausted but proud. Through the bond, she felt their joy. They had protected what mattered. They had proven their worth. Commander Thex found her an hour later in the medical bay. The hatchlings were being treated for minor injuries, and Yuna was being checked for telepathic strain. "The council wants to speak with you," Thex said. "About what happened during the battle." "Am I in trouble?" Yuna asked. Thex almost smiled. "On the contrary, you changed dragon warfare tactics in a single engagement. The council wants to understand how." The formal recognition ceremony happened 3 days later. Yuna stood in the main assembly hall wearing a proper handler's uniform that Dr. Park had helped her find. The hatchlings, now officially recognized as bonded dragons, stood behind her in perfect formation. Commander Thex presented her with the handler's insignia. "By authority of the Concordance Council, Han Yuna is hereby recognized as a full dragon handler. Furthermore, she is appointed as head of a new training program focused on cooperative dragon tactics." The assembled handlers applauded. Most of them, anyway. Vrokthar stood silent in the back, his expression unreadable. After the ceremony, Jihoon found Yuna in the training yard. "Congratulations, Handler Han, you've earned it." "I couldn't have done it without your training," Yuna said. Jihoon shook his head. "I taught you the basics. You taught everyone else something new, including me." He paused. "Your training schedule starts tomorrow. I hope you're ready." "Training schedule?" "You proved the concept works. Now you need to prove it wasn't luck. Multiple handlers are requesting transfer to your program, including Yuna." Yuna looked at the hatchlings, who were playing in the training yard with a coordination that still amazed her. "I'm ready." A week later, Ambassador Quan Deho visited the station. He found Yuna working with Yunha and 3 other new handlers, teaching them the basics of cooperative bonding. "I thought you should know," Quan said. "Humanity's status in the Concordance has been upgraded. We're now full members with all associated rights and privileges." "Because of the battle?" Yuna asked. "Because you showed the galaxy that humanity brings something valuable. A different perspective. A different kind of strength," Quan smiled. "Earth is proud of you, Yuna." After he left, Yuna stood in the center of the training arena where this had all started. The place where she had hidden in terror, where 12 hatchlings had chosen her, where everything had changed. A new group of hatchlings was being introduced today. Yuna watched the warriors demonstrate their strength, shouting and posturing. In the back corner, she noticed a young Thexian female sitting quietly, watching instead of participating. The hatchlings were released. They ignored the warriors and converged on the quiet observer. Una smiled and walked across the arena. She offered her hand to the surprised Thexian. "Hi, I'm Una. Let me teach you something about walls." The Thexian looked at her hand, then at the hatchlings forming a protective circle. "They chose me?" "They chose you because they recognized themselves in you," Una said. "Being quiet doesn't mean being weak. Sometimes the strongest walls are the ones built from understanding." Through her bond with Bora, Una felt the dragon's contentment. They had found their place in the galaxy, not by becoming what others expected, but by being exactly what they were. Together they were changing what strength meant. And they were just getting started.